Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
My understanding of the Vietnam War was first shaped by popular culture, I would say, by movies of the 70s and 80s, and then thrillers of the 70s and 80s as well, where protagonists oftentimes had backgrounds as, let's say, Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, CIA paramilitary, Marine snipers in Vietnam, and now in the 80s, they're a private investigator or a police officer and using those skills to solve problems in what was then a contemporary thriller or even on TV, same type of a thing. And then as I got a little older, probably 11, 12, 13, I really started diving in to the Vietnam War as much as I could back then in the 80s. Got the Vietnam Experience, Time Life books, reading every autobiography that I could find on someone who had spent time in Vietnam. There was that On Strategy book that came out around then that was very popular with a certain take on the war. And then in doing this research, I guess I was I was aware of it, but not in the sense that it was an overriding thought, meaning that I had heard that there was a lot of support for the Vietnam War, but because of just the influx of all these other documentaries and TV shows and things that focus on the protests, I wasn't really aware of how much support there actually was. Really, through 1968, even like 69, 68, even it was still strong. And I thought at 68, the bloodiest year of the war, of the conflict, I thought that was really a turning point, or that's what I've been told. But in doing the research, you find out that there really was a lot of support still for the war. So that was interesting. Looking more into the domino theory, you're just told that that's kind of a fallacy. But then when you actually deep dive into this and you look at the countries surrounding, not necessarily Thailand, but other ones around there, you can see, how someone in a position in a think tank, or perhaps a politician, or a military strategic thinker, somebody like that at that time could have really thought that this domino theory had some weight to it and was legitimate. And when you go back and put yourself in their shoes and study everything up until 1968 and just take that information as your lens, then you can really see how a lot of people were on essentially that train. So I learned a lot because I was looking at everything through the lens of 1968. I wasn't just saying these guys are listening to Creedence Clearwater Revival and then just dive into a book that is essentially the same as other books I've written, but it takes place in 1968. No, I had to research every character's background, whether it's a French doctor who's in his 60s. So he has his life experience up to 1968. How is he in Saigon as a French doctor? Well, his worldview is informed by World War II and these other things. How about a 70-year-old GRU, so Soviet intelligence officer? What's his worldview? What's a 25-year-old Navy SEAL on his third deployment? What's his worldview? And so all of those different perspectives really took a lot more time than I thought. And when it came to research, and that's why it became the most heavily researched book to date, and why it's coming out in October instead of June as originally planned. So, now we're looking back on things with 2020 hindsight, all the 50 plus years later, which is important to do to draw out lessons. But what I was doing, I was trying to stay rooted in 1968. So could the war have been won? I mean, you can ask that about any war that has been lost. So the answer usually would be yes, if you make different decisions along the way. So I think it is, but it could have been. But at the same time, warfare had shifted between the end of World War II and what we see in Vietnam. It's continued to evolve today, meaning that I don't know if I should say very rarely. Well, we don't see the type of bombing campaigns that we saw in World War II against civilian populations, or against military targets that are surrounded by civilian populations, where back in World War II, that was the order of the day when it came to Germany and Japan specifically. So if you did, I mean, that's something that is not on the table today, I would say, or wasn't for the last 20 years anyway, in Iraq and Afghanistan. You didn't see carpet bombing campaigns of Kabul and Baghdad. You saw targeted strikes as close as we could get with the best technology available, trying to target individuals or institutions, locations, airfields, that sort of thing. But you didn't see this just mass wave of bombing campaigns meant to turn that populace against their own government in order to get an unconditional surrender. So had you applied that, a horrible strategy to modern warfare or to Vietnam, I don't know the answer, but certainly if you made different decisions along the way, a different outcome was possible. First nonfiction with James Scott, Pulitzer Prize finalist, amazing guy. Learned so much from him as far as research goes, how to correctly research, legally research, and annotate and do all those notes. And because even though this is essentially Cry Havoc turned into historical fiction, and I have a lot of history woven into my other novels, if I make a mistake, I can always just say, "Hey, it's fiction." Go with it. But in nonfiction, you cannot do that. You have to, everything has to be right. Everything has to be annotated. And I learned so much from James Scott about that over the last few years working on Targeted Beirut. And we're working on the next one right now and should announce that probably in the next few months or maybe early next year. That topic, and it'll probably come out late 2026 or 2027. So this is a time machine, essentially back to 1968. And some of those books that I read growing up as contemporary thrillers are now my time machine back. If I want to revisit, let's say, Hunt for Red October, or I want to revisit the Brotherhood of the Rose by David Morrell, or The Charm School by Nelson DeMille, or Last of the Breed by Louis L'Amour, something like that, that takes me back to the 80s, even though they were contemporary thrillers at the time. And maybe some of my books that are contemporary thrillers will be time machines for people looking back on this current time. But this one, going back to 1968, was a completely different experience for me. And hence all that research, trying to get the gear right for these guys in Mac V Sog, who were essentially fighting a secret war going across the border into Cambodia, Laos, North Vietnam, and trying to honor those guys that stood up and went down range and came home in a time where they didn't have the support that we had coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. So I wanted one of those guys to read it and at least know that I put the effort into trying to capture the feel of 1968. And I also wanted people who lived through that time frame, who didn't go to Vietnam, but were here in another capacity in the United States or even internationally, to know that I put in the effort to try to get that feel of 1968 right. What was the tone in the world? Where were we at with the Cold War? I kick off the book in chapter 1 with the capture of the USS Pueblo. And I think everything in there is how that happened, from all the research that I did. And I did a ton of research into that chapter, not the longest chapter, but certainly one of the most well-researched of the book. And I think how that went down is accurately portrayed in chapter 1 of this novel. So that really kicks off 1968 for people. And then we have Martin Luther King, we have Bobby Kennedy, we have the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, we have all these riots, we have LBJ saying he's not running for re-election. So all these hits one after another through 1968, and then Nixon elected, of course, really as a result of all of these events. It's just an incredible time in American history. And for whatever reason, I was always drawn to the 60s, probably because of the Vietnam movies I saw growing up, the books that I read growing up, the music of the time that really spoke to me as a kid. It was my parents' generation. So I think that really spoke to me because it had such an impact on them. John F. Kennedy assassination had such an impact on them. So that became a part of my experience as well, just growing up in that household. So it's a time machine back to 1968 and is essentially an espionage thriller dropped into the heart of Saigon in this bloodiest year of the war. There are a couple other books that have done it in the past. I drew inspiration from Graham Greene and The Quiet American, of course, came out in the mid-50s. Also The Tears of Autumn by Charles McCary, that came out in 1974, and The Honorable Schoolboy by Jean Le Carré, that came out in 1977. But those are the only ones that I'm aware of that dropped espionage thrillers into Southeast Asia during that time frame. So from the end of World War II up to the end of Vietnam, essentially, and then a couple post-war years for the Le Carré novel. But that's what it is. It's an espionage thriller dropped into the heart of Saigon.